Welcome back to the Daily Bread Bible Study. We are looking at day 43 for February 12th, 2020, focusing on Numbers chapters 11 through 13. So we get to see a little bit about what happens as a result of the people's complaining against Moses and thereby complaining against God in the wilderness. And we also see that they are afraid to fight giants, even though we will learn of a future ancestor called King David. He will fight a giant when he is a youth. And that will be a story that will be very central for us as people of faith. But we will hear their context as they're wandering through this wilderness time and what is happening for them. So in Numbers chapter 11, we pick it up with the complaints. The people of God are complaining about missing out on the foods that they had in Egypt. They're growing hungry and they've got nothing beside this. What is this? Well, they call it manna, which means what is it? And it's used for their cooking, and they are able to grind it up and make food from it. But they're tired of this manna, of eating the same old thing and having to depend upon the Lord to provide it 6 days of the week and for their purposes. And so the Lord's fire is burning against them, and some people are in fact consumed by the fire at the place called Taberah, naming after that event. People were weeping in their tents because they had no meat and wanted to eat some meat. And so Moses, on behalf of the people, goes and talks to God and basically says, God, you're the one who brought them out of slavery in Egypt. Should I be responsible for all of their whining and complaining? Should I be their caretaker? I'm not able to bear all of these people alone because it's hard for me, even as a leader, to hear their complaints over and over and to continue to lead. And so this is just another statement about leadership in general, is that we often hear the negative comments that people have to say and the negative reactions. And because we are sensitive to wanting to be a good leader and wanting to hear the input of the people, we have to take that feedback and be able to take even some negative comments at time. But as I've said before, I think part of leadership is being able to figure out when negative comments are feedback and when they're just complaints or venting, and they're just people are unhappy. So I've heard it phrased this way as well. The goal of a leader is to separate the feedback from the vitriol, the stuff that can be productive and the stuff that's just going to tear you down and meant to destroy. So here God is listening and hearing some feedback. The people are hungry, and he's also wanting to provide an opportunity for them to have some food. But he is frustrated as well, too, because there are plenty of people who are just complaining. And people who did not like being in Egypt were complaining in Egypt, but now saying, oh, let's just go back and be slaves in Egypt again. So we see that the result of this is that Moses is in consultation with God, that God says, bring 70 of the elders to the tabernacle, and I will spread your spirit, Moses, across the leaders of the people to bear the burden. And then the 70 elders, they prophesy. And then we find out that there are 2 others in the camp who are prophesying as well. And Moses says, let them prophesy. If this is the work of the Lord, don't be jealous of the work of the Lord. But then it will be a holy number 72, which is a very good number because it is a number of a multiple of 12. So 6 times 12 is 72. So those numbers are half of the tribes of the 12. So it's a very good number to have, 72 there. We see that God provides for them and provides this quail on both sides of the camp. A large amount of quail, 10 homers worth, which I don't know quite the amount of omers, but they're able, the idea I get is they have a lot of quail available to them. And so they are able to eat for the whole rest of the month. And as God kind of playfully says, they're going to have it coming out of their ears, and they're just coming out of them. They'll be filled with all of the quail, and they'll get their fill of it. Moses questions whether they will be able to do that, but God says, I'm going to make it happen, and the quail do in fact come. And then the people who complained were eating the flesh. Then it says that the Lord smote the people with a great plague while they were eating all of this, because he just couldn't take the complaints, the unproductive complaints. I imagine these were people who were eating it and still complaining about the food as they were able to eat them. So, but it's exactly clear what raised God's anger in that particular sense. So in Numbers chapter 12, we see another short story of conflict against Moses, this time made by his siblings, his two siblings, his sister Miriam and his brother Aaron. And they are speaking against Moses, children of Jochebed, and they are all siblings of the same mom. He gets a complaint for marrying a Cushite woman. In the King James, it says an Ethiopian woman. So a woman who is not Jewish. And this is also interesting, too, because I haven't spent too much time going into this, but it's pretty obvious that there is a stated bias against Moses because of this for Aaron and Miriam, that they don't like the essentially race of this individual or this outsider or this other foreigner that Moses has brought into the fold. And the question is this something based upon a little bit of jealousy, or is there something deeper going on here? But that is the complaints. So God, hearing the complaints against Moses, calls the three siblings together in the tabernacle and comes down in the cloud and speaks to Aaron and Miriam there and says, I speak directly before Moses. I talk face to face with him. And if that's not good enough for you and you want to see it, well, here I am. And now, Miriam, you will be leprous for 7 days to know that I am in fact doing my diligence in talking with Moses. So the cloud leaves, and Miriam is leprous and has to be ritually unclean and outside of the camp for 7 days. But Moses, even caring about his sister, does not want her to be leprous forever. Thinking that the leprosy might last, he prays for her to be healed, which is another beautiful thing. When we have conflict as people of God, we're called not to hold up the conflict with one another or to say, why did you think that about me? But to forgive people and to even pray for those who persecute us, as Jesus will command us in the New Testament to do. So God listened to Moses' prayers, but allowed Miriam to suffer a consequence for 7 days. And it also mentions that the camp did not leave while she was leprous, that she was there and the community waited with her. I presume this also means that God's Spirit was still on the tabernacle. It wasn't, the cloud was still over the tabernacle instead of the cloud being physically down in it, as it was for Miriam and Aaron when they came and visited with Moses. I imagine God's presence is there because, as it said just a few chapters before, whenever God's presence in the cloud was there, they would remain there, and whenever the presence moved, they would move as well. But moving on to a fascinating story in chapter 13, we see a first attempt at moving into the promised land. So we see spies are sent, gathered up from the 12 ancestral tribes. Just to remember, the ancestral tribes of the Israelites are different than the actual sons of Jacob, or his name changed to Israel. For example, the Levites are not included in the ancestral tribe because they are set apart on behalf of God. The tribe of Levi is a special set apart tribe for the priestly functions of the tabernacle. And so they do not go to war. They do not fight in war. They take the holy objects around in battle, but they do not fight in the war. And so they are not sent as scouts. It's the ancestral tribes, and Levi's portion basically taken with Joseph's portion and doubled to Joseph, who then his sons Ephraim and Manasseh get a equal share of the tribe to their it would be their aunts or their uncles. Sorry, it would be their uncles. They would get equal share to their uncles. So, anyways, they are there, the 12 ancestral tribes, and they are going to scout for this war. So Moses asked them to give a very thorough and detailed report of the promised land, and they spend 40 days searching it all out so they can be able to give back this detailed report. And they say, surely it is a land flowing with milk and honey. And then they list most of the sons of Ham, as we mentioned back in Genesis, when Ham was cursed, one of Noah's 3 children. Those are where the Canaanites come from. The Egyptians are sons of Ham as well, and a lot of the other people in that area, which they will be fighting, are descendants of Ham. So the Canaanites and all of the descendants of Ham are kind of listed there as the people they will remove in order to see the promised land. Now it says that the scouts are doubtful, and that the spies, the 12 spies that are sent, they are kind of tentative. All with the exception of 2. We see that Joshua or Hoshua tribe, he's from the tribe of Ephraim. He will have a whole book dedicated to his endeavors and his leadership coming up later in the Old Testament. He is a central figure. And then Caleb as well, too, from the tribe of Judah, says that, yeah, we can fight, we can take them, we should be able to win as long as God is with us. But the rest, the other 10, are hesitant and claim to have seen giants and feel like we are but grasshoppers. How can we ever be able to overcome these giants? Well, this, in a lot of ways, is setting up a beautiful story that we have later on called the David and Goliath story, as David fights the giant Goliath and wins because even though he is a young boy, that he takes his sling and his confidence in God, and that God will provide, and that God's name must not be shamed by this giant who is doing that. And we will get to see the ways in which that God provides even in the midst of giants and even against those strong forces who we think will win. This is setting up the whole conquest of the promised land as well, because the Israelites did not really feel like they were going to inherit the land. They didn't feel like their battles were going to be productive. They were doubted themselves, but they also knew that God was with them, and so they went with boldness to fight against the fights that God called them to. So I encourage you, whenever you first read a report or hear something that's intimidating and challenges you, that you pray to God and that you can be able to find God as a source of strength in the midst of adversity, and to know that ultimately whatever comes about, it is in God's hands and God leading us to where God is calling us to the future. Maybe we will succeed. Maybe we won't have the success we imagine, But when we go with God, we will succeed because we will be following what God has for our life, and that we will have the opportunity to participate in that. So here ends our Daily Bread discussion. Thanks for joining me. I'd love to connect with you. I've got a group me page where we can share chats and text. We've got Facebook. Shepherd King has an email as well, or a website. You can find contact information there as well. Or you can go to my Google page, which has all of these recordings back through the whole time period I've been doing it at this point in time, starting at Genesis 1. So have a wonderful day. God bless you. Thank you for joining me.